our clerk to ensure that we in fact have posted this?
Yes, it has been posted. The official notice of the budget hearing and of the annual meeting was published as a Class 2 notice in the Whitefish Bay North Shore Now newspaper on August 25th and September 1st, 2016.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We're going to move right to the presentation of the school district budget. But before we do, I need to give you just a little bit of instruction as to, but an explanation as to the difference between the budget hearing first and then the school board meeting, the annual meeting second. And here it is. In a school district like Whitefish Bay, School District Whitefish Bay, the budget is developed by the staff members, of which we're very thankful, and the school board. And that budget reflects the estimated revenue and expenditure amounts for the next budget year, along with balances from the previous 2 years. The budget we're dealing with, the 2016-2017 budget, was developed consistent with established limitations and priorities as a result of a very comprehensive, months-long process during this last school year. Administrators brought updates to the school board meetings where board members and general public, we could always use more public members by the way, were informed of the developing budget decisions and were given the opportunity to give feedback on that budget. Class 2 notice has been published with the time and date, as we've heard, of today's annual meeting. The annual meeting must include a budget hearing by state law. A Class 1 notice has been published with a summary of the budget, the place where the budget detail is available for public inspection, and the time and place here of the budget meeting. So the budget hearing right now is actually for the school board, and you're the audience for that. And this is where the school board itself, the members, gets the opportunity to discuss and comment on the proposed budget. And then the school board decides whether it's going to approve the budget or not. And we just vote on that. After the budget goes through, hopefully there's a motion and it's approved, then we start the annual meeting. And that annual meeting is with Whitefish Bay residents, all of you who are here. If you are a student, if you're 18, you can vote. But if you're not, unfortunately, you can't. And either way, we're happy you're here, so thank you for participating. And so as the annual meeting, probably one of the biggest things we do is the tax levy. And so that will be for taxpayer approval. And that's the difference. So thank you all for attending. And I'm going to hand it over to Shawn Yde, who will do our budget presentation. We all are going to get down on the floor again so we can actually see it. So.
Hi, I'm Shawn Yde. I'm the Director of Business Services for the school district. And as Ann had indicated, this is really 11 months of work. We start our budget process in November and October by doing our enrollment projections. And on behalf of the school board and the administration, I know that many of you have attended meetings or are participating tonight by attending this meeting, and we certainly appreciate the participation in the process itself. John was talking about hopes, and the budget that we're presenting tonight is really the financial quantification of the focus of trying to accomplish what's included in that focus plan. And as we develop this budget, we don't really develop it in a bubble. We are certainly dealing with a difficult economic period in the state of Wisconsin. And last year, 2015-16, was the first year in Wisconsin history that the revenue cap was frozen for public schools. Well, 2016-17 will be the second consecutive year that it's frozen. So when we start our budget process, we always have started with enrollment projections, and we do that for two reasons. One, enrollment is very important in the budget development because it determines when we calculate our enrollment and understand how many students we have coming, we better understand our staffing needs for the upcoming school year. It also determines the amount of money that we receive through the state revenue cap formula. And the revenue cap formula really takes a 3-year average of student enrollment and multiplies by a per pupil amount. It's different for each school. Ours is approximately $11,500. And that determines the amount of money we have available or can raise through two primary sources of revenue, tax levy and state aid. For many years, we were blessed with a very gradual increase in enrollment, as this chart shows, and we peaked out in 2014-15. I'm going to take this off so I can speak it and at least look over there also. As I said, we had very gradual enrollment growth. In 2015-16, the legislature changed some of the, well, they basically eliminated the 220 program, grandfathering only the students that were in the program. Whitefish Bay was one of the larger participants in that program, and at that time we had about 211 students in the program. What you see the last 2 years is a drop-off in the number of students. Approximately, well, the first year we lost 25 220 students. The second year we lost another approximately 20 students. So over the next probably 11 years, we're going to continue to taper down as those students graduate. We no longer can replace students in the 220 program. The state does not allow for that. So we're going to experience a decline in our enrollment. Our resident enrollment has been relatively flat. We did have, as you look at that drop last year of 78 students, there was a drop in resident enrollment, a slight drop, and there was another slight drop this year, largely because we had two very large classes go through the high school. Last year we had a senior class that was approximately 265 kids, and our normal classes are around 220. So we just had an above average class that graduated. So as we project our enrollment out, you'll see after this year that we anticipated a 53 student drop this year because of that senior class graduating. But after this year, we are looking at a projection that looks fairly stable in terms of the enrollment. As I said, the enrollment then has a very direct correlation on the staffing. And we have a long history of aligning our resources with our core mission, which is teaching. If you look at this chart, this is really the last 5 years of our staffing, and it directly correlates to the previous chart where we had the enrollment growth, and now we're in a cycle of lower enrollment, and you'll see that it has a direct correlation on the number of teachers that we staff. We're down, or estimate to be down, 1.89 FTE teaching. We actually were down 3 teachers from last year, but we added a reading support position at the middle school, or just under three teachers, but we added a reading support in line with the PCL program that was discussed earlier. And there's just some minor changes. We had 1.5 increase in a support aide, but that was balanced off because our student supervisor was moved into the support group. So relatively similar staffing to the previous year, with the exception of the teaching group, and that's directly related to fewer students. Now getting into the actual expenditure budget, what you have here is the 2015-16 proposed budgeted expenditures compared with the proposed budget expenditure plan for 16-17. If you look at our general fund, the general fund is really our K-12 operations. That and the special ed fund account for really all of our teaching and instructional costs. Those two funds in particular, if you look at the increase, you'll see we have a $11,000 increase in the general fund and a $26,000 decrease in the special ed fund. The long-term, or the debt service fund, is the long-term debt retirement that represents the payments on the 2009 referendum that was completed, the referendum and the construction that was completed back in 2010 and 11. That's the orderly debt payment on that. The capital projects funds would normally, we don't have any money in there or budgeted this year, but that would normally cover, that would be where we deposited referendum funds if we were going to do a building project. The food service fund is really our morning milk programs that run at the 2 elementary schools and the middle school. The trust fund, Fund 70, is our OPEB trust. That is a trust fund that was developed or created to fund the post-retirement obligations we have for health insurance for employees who are eligible for that benefit between their retirement and age 65. And then lastly, the Community Service Fund, which is our rec and adult ed. And if you look again, you're not going to see big increases because, as I said, the state revenue cap was frozen again for 16-17. So if you look at the total of all funds, you'll see that the increase in the second to last column, at the second line from the bottom, is $14,000 or less than 0.3%. Showing this in a graph form, we spend $42,000 or $42 million in a fiscal year. And as you would expect, the majority of those expenditures go to service students. Again, the general fund and the special ed fund, which are our K-12 operations, they account for 90% of our total expenditures. The debt service fund, again, which is the fund that pays for those monies that were borrowed in the 2009 referendum, is just under 5%. The trust fund is just under 2%. Community service is just under 4%, and food service is 0.8%. The general fund in particular, which again is the fund that accounts for K-12 operations, is $33,190,000. And if you look at the expenses in that fund, they're largely made up by the first two categories, which are salaries and benefits. And the second one says other objects. What that is a transfer that has to be made between the general fund to the special ed fund to cover any shortfall that the special ed fund has. So the special ed fund receives some aid from the federal government, some aid from the state government with regard to some of our special needs students, but any shortfall you have to transfer money from the general fund. So if you add those two funds together, again, it's 88% of the operating fund. Purchase services, which would be gas, oil, electric to heat the schools, contracted services, our audit, legal fees, is 7.86% of the general fund. Non-capital objects, which is instructional materials, textbooks, papers, cleaning materials, software, account for 2.76. Insurance, which is really just casualty insurance, workman's comp, general liability, is just under 1%. Capital objects, which would be computers, instructional equipment such as overhead projectors, vehicles, vans, motors that are used in HVAC, make up 0.72% of the general fund budget. And then lastly, we budget a very slight amount, $6,000 for cash flow borrowing. If we have to do cash flow borrowing, we've been fortunate enough to avoid it the last couple of years, but that's it shows up, but it's less than 1/100th of a percent. If we then look at the other side of the equation, which is the revenue side, in Wisconsin, revenue for school district is controlled, again, through the revenue cap formula. The formula controls the district's two largest sources of revenue, property tax and state aid. This chart in particular focuses on the three funds that we actually levy a tax for. And those are below. That's the general fund, the debt service fund, and the community services fund. If you look at the comparison again of the 2015-16 revenue to the 2016-17 revenue, you'll see that the tax levy is increased by $376,000. That's a direct result of us actually losing aid. We're losing $170,000 of aid from the state government. Now, last year, the state government, during the biennial budget, the first year of the biennium, had an absolutely flat aid amount appropriated to public schools, and then instituted a voucher program that pulled money from that pool. In the second year of that biennium, the state has added over $100 million. So you would think that we would go up slightly. However, with the 220 program being phased out at the state level, we're losing some of the integration aid that came from the 220 program, and so the increase that we would have gotten, a slight increase in the equalization aid, was offset by the loss of the integration aid. So we're estimating a decrease of $170,000 instead of that what would have otherwise probably been an increase. Other receipts are primarily what we call open enrollment and interest on investments, things like that. We estimate an increase of $21,000, and last year we had budgeted for the use of some reserve. This year we are not budgeting for the use of any operating reserve in our general fund at this point. The debt service fund, again, which is the payment on any debt that we have, and it's really the debt associated with the 2009 referendum. You'll see that the debt payment went up just slightly. It's up $35,000. The total fund revenue is up $17,000. And then the last fund is the community service fund, which you'll see that the tax levy is actually down $34,000. Other receipts are up $141,000, and that's largely our new before and after program called Connects. Connects program has been very successful. It serves about 150 kids, but it has grown and has been very well received in the community, and the revenues have increased in community services as a result of that program operating. As you can see, if you look at the total revenues at the bottom, again, a very, very slight increase in the proposed revenue budget. When we look at the revenues that come into Fund 10, the operating revenue, it's always interesting to see how much the property tax amount is. And for the 16-17 school year, we're projecting the property tax to be 61.91%. Last year it was 62%. So again, almost the same as it was last year. All other sources, which is our open enrollment, is 0.84. That also, those other sources also include a slight insurance dividend that we receive. Federal aid is just over 0.5%, and that's our Title I. In the general fund, that is solely Title I. And then state aid makes up 34.63%, and that's our equalization and integration aid. And then lastly, we have local revenue, which are our facility rental, interest on investments, student fees and gifts, which is just under 2%. Revenues for community services there's really just two primary sources. We have program fees, which make up 79% of our revenue sources. Last year, that was actually 75%. If we look at the tax levy portion, it's projected to be 21%. In 14-15, that was 28%. Last year it was 25%, and it's 21% projected for this coming year. Again, largely around the success of the Connects program that was developed. The property tax that we levy in this fund generally supports programs and the cost of the staff that do not generate revenue. And those programs would be things like the crossing guard program that's provided for all of the schools in the district, both parochials and public, senior programs that we operate, and the recreation staff that are housed over at Lydell. Getting to a quick summary, this is our current estimate of the tax levy and the tax rate based on the information we have at this time. It will absolutely change between now and October 15th when our aid is certified by the state of Wisconsin. But if you look at this chart, you'll see that we have projected the general fund levy just up very slightly. The total levy rate, and I know this is very small print, is actually, our levy rate total on an equalized basis is actually down. It's going from 10.54 mils to 10.36. And so what that is really the tax levy divided over all the property value in the district. And we had a slight increase in the property value, the equalized property value in the school district. But people in Whitefish Bay, because we're largely residential, we really have the better way to calculate the levy would be based on the assessed. And if you look at the assessed rate, last year we had an assessed rate of 10.98, and that rate will actually increase very slightly to $11.09 per $1,000 of assessed value. What's that? What does that mean? And I think this is the slide that helps people understand the actual impact. On a property that would be valued at $400,000 in 15-16, that same property in 16-17, you would, if you had a $400,000 home, you would have paid $4,392. And this is, understand, this is just for the school portion of a levy. There are other taxing entities in Whitefish Bay, so I don't want you to think that this is going to be the tax on a $400,000 home, because the village is going to assess taxes, so will the vocational schools, the county, etc. But for the school portion of the levy, you're going to see a difference of $44 for the entire year, which equates to about $3.66 a month. With that, I will conclude the budget presentation and allow the board to ask any questions that they would have.
So if we're not going to have a reserve this year, what happens if there's some kind of catastrophe or something like that?
Our board policy is between 18 and 25%. We're on the high end of the range for reserve right now. I'm not sure I heard the rest of your question.
No, I just wondered what the reserve was for, if we had put aside in case something happened, or what that was in place for, since we're going to be about $215,000 down.
The reserve is used for multiple purposes. First of all, the reserve is used for cash flow purposes. While we have a balance at the end of the year, in December, we have an arrangement with the village to provide us an early tax levy an amount so that we can just meet our payrolls. So we get state aid at the start of the year, some, not a lot, but taxes don't come until January 15th is when they're due. And so the school district really operates without revenue from the end of August July 1, the start of the fiscal year, all the way until January 15th, until we get our first tax collection. So we draw down the reserves and actually go in slightly negative in December, and then by the end of the fiscal year, we're back to a reserve balance. So one, it's used to meet our cash flow purposes. Without the reserve there, the district would have to borrow money and incur both the legal expense and the interest cost to do that. So the primary purpose of having health reserve would be for cash flow purposes. Second, it also acts as a rainy day fund. If there was some major issue with the roof or a boiler blowing up, certainly the school district would not have that within the context of its current budget and would have to request of the board an expenditure to repair or purchase a needed item. So it's used in two ways.
Other questions?
I have sort of a back to basics question. In 1993, when we went to revenue caps and changed the funding formula at the state, they had promised 2/3 funding of education costs. And when I look at the slide, our residents are paying about 61% of the property tax. Could you give a very brief explanation for that? Because I think we say, gee, we all hear, oh, well, the state pays for 2/3 funding, but obviously there's more burden on our residents for school funding.
And state aid actually varies widely between school districts also. So there would be districts, the state equalization aid formula tries to equalize tax effort throughout the state. So a district who, and they do that based on property values. So a district that has lower property values would be propped up with state aid so that for equal spending, you would have relatively similar tax or tax effort. In Whitefish Bay, I think we're in the $700,000 range, or I'm sorry, we have approximately $700,000 under each student that we have in the district, and so I would say we're probably in the top quartile, but around the 75th percentile. So we still receive state aid. There are districts and very close neighboring districts who are completely only aided at $1,000 per pupil. We're still receiving what I would consider substantial aid, but largely because we don't have we're residential property and not much commercial property in this district. So we do receive aid. We've never been anywhere near 2/3 funded. The state is really looking at the entire state when they make that statement. But certainly the state aid has declined substantially it has not remotely kept up with the expenditure side. At the same time that they had guaranteed 2/3 funding, they also guaranteed 68% reimbursement, 67% reimbursement in special ed children, and that's down to 27%. So it's not just the equalization inside of it, it's across the board.
Shawn, I wonder if you could discuss just briefly what the impact of state voucher program is on the amount of state aid you receive and how that works.
It's extremely difficult to know what the impact of the state voucher program is. The voucher program is structured so that the aid is that when a student takes a voucher and goes to a parochial school, the district of residence. Last year we didn't have any kids that took a voucher. So the aid is transferred from the public school to a parochial school. And then the public school is allowed to make up the loss of that transfer with their taxes. So essentially, the public school is now taxing to pay for the transfer that occurs to the voucher. What the amount is across the state, I don't have that with me, or I haven't seen it even published, how much money that's pulled out of the system. But with no new money going into the system, any money going out of the system means lowering for public schools.
One other clarification. You've mentioned the Chapter 220 program that sunsetted. That also is impacting on the amount of state aid because that came as property tax relief, not as additional money for students, right?
Correct. We received our per pupil average amount in transfer aid for the 220 program. And now as those students, the number of students we have are reducing, the aid will be reduced accordingly. So we were receiving, I think it was $10,018 per student that we're receiving for the 220 because they pull out some of the categorical aids that we receive when we really have a per pupil in the 11, it's in the mid 11s, $11,000 range. So they pull out a little bit of some small amount of categorical aid. The reimbursement that we were getting on a integration transfer student would have been 10,000 in the low 10,000 range. And so for every student that's leaving, we will be losing that same amount of aid as they're no longer allowed to enroll those students in the program.
Thank you.
What, Shawn, is our approximate per pupil spending in the district? I know that you don't know that yet because we still don't know our full enrollment, but do you have an approximate?
I don't have it with me, but it's in the 11. It was in the bulletin that was sent to every home. It's in the 11,000 or 500 range is what I believe it is.
And do you happen to know approximately again how much of that is provided by the state? I know that we're looking at the same numbers just in a different way.
Well, if we look at the entire general fund, the state's providing 34% of our revenue in the general fund. So, and a little less in the special ed.
Thank you, Shawn. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay.
Other questions?
I have a comment, and we don't have a lot of questions, and this is a really large amount of money to approve, but what people don't see is that last year, shortly after this meeting, we started getting information at the board about enrollment and different things that impacted. So we have asked lots of questions and had a lot of information provided over the course of the year, and I really want to thank Shawn and his team for the budget process that makes this really come together nicely. It means we don't have a lot of issues, a lot of questions because we've already vetted those throughout the year. But we don't take this lightly. We really look at it and examine it. So I just want to project that to the audience because it's basically a really long process. So a lot of hard work goes into it. And I am board members, we all appreciate that.
Yes, Kristin?
I also just wanted to add that your presentation, Shawn, takes very complicated information and makes it very easy to understand, not just for those of us here and the audience, but for the students in the audience. So thank you so much for making that easy for us to understand.
So I have one question with regard to costs. What has been our goal, since we know we have a flat sort of reimbursement from the state, what has been our goal with regard to expenses? We looked at revenue, but just, you wouldn't mind just saying a few words on what we've been trying to do on expenses?
Well, the biggest driver is salary and benefits. And when Act 10 came into effect in 2011, we were looking at a number of items that were somewhat troubling. In particular, the guaranteed post-retirement health insurance that was stipulated in a lot of collective bargaining agreements, with health insurance increasing at rates that absolutely couldn't have been sustained. We made modifications to our post-retirement liability. We essentially eliminated the benefit after 2011, and we put in a new compensation model in 2013-14. We've been bidding health insurance every year, so we do a full marketing of health insurance. In particular, this budget was extremely benefited by over a 6.5% reduction in our health insurance costs as a result of that bidding process, and we had basically 3 years of reductions to health insurance, so I'm not necessarily optimistic that that trend can continue. What we do is we really look at the cost drivers and we try to align what resources we have with the focus and goals that are outlined in the earlier projections. So it's a balancing act of trying to make sure that our class sizes are appropriate, and we know that this community in particular values smaller class sizes. So at the primary levels, we do full analysis of enrollment, we do full analysis sectioning at both middle school and high school to come up with an appropriate staffing plan. And that means that we have some electives that bounce a little bit. And 1 year a teacher may have a full load in business, and the next year kids elect to go to a different class. The full load may be somewhere else. And I know that does cause some unhappy folks, because from a choice, we want everybody to be full-time, and we want kids to have choices, all electives, but that's really part of that process. And because salaries and fringe benefits are such a big part of a school district's cost structure, that's really where the focus is.
Thank you. We are very appreciative of all the work that goes into trying to keep all that. Yes.
I do think it's worth pointing out to folks who do not regularly attend board meetings that we insert ourselves in this process even before it begins by ranking 16 different areas of spending. Each individual board member does, and then the results are compiled, and the compilation is used by the district staff in organizing the budget. So I do think the priorities of the board, as nearly as they can be followed, are followed by this administration, and I appreciate the level of participation that you guys built into the process.
All right, seeing no further questions, then I'll entertain a motion with regard to this budget proposal. Doug, would you mind?
Be resolved that the school board for the school district of Whitefish Bay adopts the proposed 2016-2017 school district budget in the total amount of $42,263,000. Put my glasses on, $578.
So can I entertain a friendly amendment? Does somebody want to take a look at that again?
Yes, I amended to the total amount of $42,265,578.
Okay, yes, as I said, with my glasses on. We should probably also say that we don't usually rely on board seating based on gender, but we thought we'd make a special effort tonight.
Okay, so we have a motion, and it's been friendly amendment. Is there a second to the amendment motion?
I will second it.
Great. Kristin will second. Jennifer was the one who did the amendment. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. No opposition and no abstentions. So that has passed. Happily, I now move to the adjournment portion of this budget hearing. I will accept the motion for adjournment. Would anybody like to make that motion?
We adjourn.
Great. Doug has moved that we adjourn. We have a second. And Jennifer seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? No. And that passes. Terrific. So that's the